Soft influencers, let's get booze.
Listen to Abe Thompson for an hour. I'd rather fuck a blood relative.
It's Abe Thompson.
Ladies and gents, beauties and binfluencers, welcome to episode 166 of Abe Thompson and Other Disappointments, your twice weekly delve into all things politics and dystopia. An uplifting look at the downers of the modern world. We talk about the climate change shit show. We pull apart the Russia-Ukraine shit show. We drink our way through the Brexit and Tory corruption shit show and bundle it up and ship it out to you, all wrapped up as this lovably shit show. Quick doff of the cap to the Patreons. I'm looking forward to catching up with you all over a beer or two. That's on Friday the 28th of April. If you like the sound of this podcast, do consider jumping on the Patreon. It's patreon.com/Abe Thompson. For the tiers, they start at like £3 a month, but you can get access to the Discord. That's like instant messaging Discord chat that we have. I pop in there every day. We talk shit about Tories. We post memes. It's a good time. You get an RSS feed, which means that you get episodes of the podcast 2 days before everyone else, and they go straight into your regular podcast player. There is a gig coming up in July, a live show. That's probably going to be in Dalston, and tickets for that will go out to the Patreons first. So, as I say, don't be a stranger. Jump on patreon.com/Abe Thompson. Now, Friday nights, I normally have a guest with me, and then on Wednesday, I do a solo show in which I rant, roast, and ridicule my way through the news. I douse my funny bone in liquor and try to make sense of the senseless. But this week is a bit of a switch around. Right now, I'm joined by a guy that I'm super psyched to be talking to or speaking with. You will have no doubt seen his satirical content permeating through the chaotic wilds of Twitter, if not seen him at one of his many Fringe shows, including Truth and Pleasure and Grow Up Green. If it's your first time listening, you've joined us for a good one. Please pull up a chair, crack open a beer or a cheeky G&T, and welcome to the show, Matt Goddamn Green. Woo!
I should use that. That should be my wrestling name.
Yeah, it's pretty good, isn't it? How are you doing? You okay?
I'm all right. Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Yeah, how are you?
Yeah, I'm okay. I've had some technical issues this morning.
I'm aware.
Yeah. My son tried to break into the cabin as we were recording the first take of this, so
it's a great blooper.
Yeah. So it's all good. All good this end. Really chuffed to get you on, Matt. I suppose I, like a lot of people, first became aware of you through seeing your satirical shorts going on Twitter, catching fire, going viral. When I was sort of looking into your background ahead of you coming on here today, I was quite sort of like pleased and refreshed and like to see that there was this entire sort of Fringe Matt Green beforehand. Now, I've been to Edinburgh Fringe myself. It is a chaotic, anxious, but hilarious time up there. I wondered if maybe you could take us through like your journey of starting off as, Fringe or like even just live comedy, as it were, and how you've landed at where you are now today.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I basically started, I guess, pretty young. I love doing like school plays and like little sketch shows and stuff at school. And then when I was at university, I joined the Comedy Society there. We did loads of Fringe shows, sketch shows. Every couple of weeks there was a sort of open mic night type thing, so you could kind of try out material. And then every term we did like a full show. So at Christmas there was like a pantomime, and spring there was a sketch show, and then in the summer there was a sketch show that went on tour. So that was my first experience of doing the Edinburgh Fringe, was part of that tour. Fell in love with it. Did a couple of those tours, and then after I graduated did a couple of sketch shows up there, and then sort of, I guess nearly 20 years ago now, did some stand-up for the first time, because I felt like, because although sketch shows and plays and things like that are great and really good fun, the problem with them is that you're always reliant on other people, and you have to work with other people, even if it's just two of you. That's, you always have to organize rehearsals around each other's schedules and stuff. And I thought, I just want to do something that's just me. And I knew a couple of people who'd started doing stand-up, and I went to see them, and I thought, okay, I can see my way into doing this, I think. just booked some open mic gigs and kind of went on from there, really. And as I say, it's been nearly 20 years since I did my first gigs. And after 2 or 3 years, sort of started going a bit more professional, and that became my job. So for most of the last 20 years, I was basically a jobbing stand-up. I'd go around the country. I'd do Edinburgh Fringe shows most years, sometimes Camden Fringe instead. That was kind of what I was doing. And it was only really, and then I guess probably maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I started doing a bit more sort of making short films,
Right.
helping a friend of mine who's a director, sort of making stuff, and then learning how to do some editing and learning how to use the phone camera and to make little videos and things. And that sort of was really, I was lucky. I felt, quite lucky, the timing of that I sort of started learning that when lockdown happened. And of course, for everyone who works in stand-up live comedy, it was there was no live comedy allowed for over a year. So we all had to find other stuff to do. And I wasn't sure what I would do. I didn't know, there was a part of me that thought I might just give up and do something totally different. But I started making these little sketches at home. And initially they were kind of they were actually about the Fringe. They were about the fact the Fringe was cancelled and sort of jokes about that. And then a few other sort of random little COVID jokes. And then for the first year or so, I think, of lockdown and COVID, I kind of was doing a sort of whole variety of things and making sketches about all sorts of stuff. And then slowly I began to think, actually, what I want to do is more political stuff, more satirical stuff. That seemed to work quite well on Twitter. People seem to enjoy it and sort of start sharing it more. And as you say, some of the videos started going a bit viral. And it's always been I've always loved satirical and political comedy. I've always loved things like The Day Today, or anything that Armando Iannucci's been involved in, or Chris Morris, or people like that. And so I always found that quite hard to do on stage. Talking about politics is not easy in a stand-up environment, particularly if you're playing a club show at a weekend. People don't normally want to hear about, what's going on in Westminster, probably. You can do a couple of jokes about it, but you can't do a whole set on it, probably. Or at least I would always find that quite tricky.
Was it because I feel very similar. So the stand-up that I used to do was primarily around taking drugs, music, trying to get laid, all of box tick, traditional. I guess I would say East Coast American style stand-up, right? But it wasn't because I wasn't interested in political comedy. I found that quite stimulating to watch, but I always felt like you as a stand-up, you have to be so acutely conscious of what your face is what your face is capable of delivering. There's a place for political comedy on a stage, but I didn't feel like it should come out of my face. It was something I was capable of delivering. It was much better suited to a Ben Elton or or someone. Was it the same with you? You didn't feel like you could do that, or you would just prefer doing it?
That's a good way of putting it. I think in some ways, definitely that. There were definitely, I think when you do comedy, as as you do stand up, you learn what your voice is. You learn what an audience will accept from you and what they won't accept from you. And if you talk about something that you're interested in but they're not interested in, you very quickly realize that there's a kind of clash there, and that you have to read a room. You have to be able to play to who's in front of you. You can do the funniest joke in the world, but if it's not funny to those people, then you've got a problem. And I think, for a long time, I kind of my style was quite observational, quite personal, quite improvisational with the audience. When I was comparing, and that was fine. And I would sort of feed in little bits of political stuff, little bits of topical stuff when I could, and that was fine. But I always felt like I was slightly fighting what the audience wanted from me,
right.
That they kind of didn't necessarily want that, but they were happy to take it for a bit, but they then wanted me to talk about other stuff. And that's why I'm doing my first sort of tour show at the beginning of next year. It's not fully confirmed yet, but it's going to be beginning of 2024. And I'm doing work in progress shows this summer to sort of build to that. And that's very, very much sort of the first time I'm going to be aiming a show at people who've seen my stuff online.
Yeah.
And therefore, hopefully, have an interest in politics, have an interest in topical stuff.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be completely politics based. There will be other stuff in it. There will be some material. Definitely, there'll be stand-up material in it that's more kind of personal and more observational that I'm sort of more used to doing. But there's definitely going to be a big chunk of political stuff in it, and I'm really excited. I'm sort of excited and nervous and intrigued and looking forward to seeing how that works. Like, if an audience who like my stuff online comes to see it, and they, will there be quite a different audience? Would it actually be quite similar? That's going to be quite an exciting experiment.
Is there a sort of like a blurring of the lines in the sense that, so on Twitter, your stuff is very political, very satirical, and then maybe there's a temptation to drag that audience into more of the observational stand-up, the broad stuff. But then conversely, when you do live stuff, you slowly want to expose that live following to more of the political stuff?
Yeah, I think you've always just got to be aware of what you're doing and who the audience is. Like, if you're playing to a Saturday night weekend gig in central London where half the audience are tourists and almost everyone's come out for a good night out, you'd be a bit silly, I think, to just spend the whole gig talking about the financial crisis or something, like it wouldn't, or how to always evil, because you can definitely throw some of that stuff in and people will respond to it. But if you just spend the whole time doing that, then you're kind of not really fulfilling a brief. That's not really what the audience are there for. Whereas I think when you're doing your own show, you always have a bit more of a leeway to, like, a license to just do, they're there to see you, and so they want to see what you've got to say about stuff. So it's a bit different to going to a gig. And that's why, stand up and political stuff is always a bit tricky, that you're always slightly clashing between those two audiences. And but of course they're different. The thing about a sketch online is that I'm pitching that to people who I think will like it. And hopefully that's, lots of people, but I don't know. But whoever those people are, if they like it, they'll be the ones who'll share it and retweet it and comment on it and whatever. And the people who don't like it, 9 times out of 10, they just ignore it. They just go, no, that's not for me. Occasionally you get a few people saying, oh, this is rubbish or whatever. But actually, I found my personal experience, and I've been lucky, I think, on Twitter, is that, and on YouTube and all the other places I put stuff, is mostly people just either like it or ignore it. But that's a bit harder to do in a live environment, because if someone's enjoying it, great. But if someone's not enjoying it, then quickly that's, well, hang on, you're meant to be entertaining them as well. So you you can't cut half the audience off.
Well, also it becomes this sort of, like, and forgive me for a slightly clumsy term here, but it becomes kind of crowd cancer. It's like if there's 3 or 4 people over here who are quite obviously not having a good time, they actually become so much of a distraction, like, to the other audience. They're like, wow, look at they're not happy. Like, is he going to respond to that? Is he like, and then you've got kind of, I don't know, a row or 2 rows of people at the front who are on the edge of their seat, like, buttocks on eggshells, thinking, and then they're no longer listening to you. And that's, obviously the fundamental part of your stuff. Absolutely.
I mean, I think it's different. Like, it's, I think on Twitter you can say your piece and move on, like, and you put the video out there, and it's up to people whether they like it or not. And if they like it, great. If they don't, fine. Whereas, in a live environment, you're always a bit more aware of the audience, and they're a bit more aware of you, and it's more of a conversation, because it has to be, because you're in a space. And I remember hearing Stuart Lee said something, which I'm sure he's not the only person who said this, but he's the person I remember saying it, which is, the show is what happens in the room. So in a live environment, whatever happens, that's what's happening. That's the show, So if it's going well or badly, that you've got to do something with it. Whereas, with Twitter videos, I can kind of sculpt them and make them exactly what I want them to be, and get the timing exactly right, and all the editing exactly how I want it. And I love that. It's great. It's part of why I really love doing them. But I'm aware that when you go into a live environment, there is more of a sort of, a dialogue.
Yeah. You seem to escape a lot of the sort of barrage of political hate that a lot of people get on Twitter. Like, I think, like, part of it is that you've got quite a likable face, if you'll forgive me for saying. Like, you sort of, you're not somebody who I could imagine getting into a screaming row at a bus stop.
I hope that's fair.
Yeah, there are content creators who do give off that energy, and so I guess maybe it's easier to then get combative in return, reciprocally to them. But it does feel like, I can put a a video out highlighting Tory social services neglect, or I can put a video out highlighting institutional racism, and I will get just a barrage of abuse. Some of the people I'm quite friendly with within the content creation and satire space also get a lot of abuse. You seem to sort of navigate your way around that. I don't know if it's partly because you come off as very likable, or if it's that there's more comedic mileage than there is activism mileage. Like, you're more focused on the joke than
I think so. I mean, I'm definitely a comedian first and everything else second. Like, I'm, you know, every time I make a video, I want it to be funny. I want people to laugh at it. And occasionally, if I put something out that, or if I write something that is a bit more strident than not, I do always kind of worry about that a bit. Like, I always think, is this actually funny, or am I being a bit too preachy or a bit too kind of just playing to the choir? And I think, you know, that I think that's partly just my own instincts, based on working live. Like, I always want to get the laugh, even if I can't hear it. I want the people to at home enjoy it. And that's also just who I am. Like, I'm not an activist. I'm not I haven't been someone who's been on the front lines. You know, I've been to a few protests over the years, and I've signed a few petitions and all that kind of stuff, but I'm not someone who is, you know, really deep into that world. I like to think that if I'm doing satire that's kind of useful in any way, it's about sort of helping people laugh at the ridiculousness of what's going on, and hopefully see some of the kind of awfulness, but from a from sort of ironic point of view, so they don't go completely mad. And also, I think it's partly because I don't really talk in my own voice online. Like, I'm mostly talking the voice of a character. You know, I'm mostly playing a interviewer or a minister or a presenter or whatever it is. And when I use stand-up clips, that's me as doing stand-up, but those are less political normally. So it's sort of, I'm not sitting on screen saying, right, this is what I think and this is what you've got to think. I'm sort of saying, here is a comic conceit about what's happened in the news today. Take from it what you will. And I hope, and I think my, what I think and my feelings and my sort of anger and my frustration and all that, I think they come through.
Yeah.
But also, I have a number of people who get in touch and say, I like Boris Johnson, or I'm a Conservative fan, but I still like your videos because I think they're funny. And I think, okay, that's fine. Like, I'd rather, I want people to have a nice time and have enjoy my stuff. And then maybe some people might go,
instead
maybe
of
I'm
replying
not
like, really? Well, fuck off. Yeah,
exactly. But I think some people would. I think there is an element of that. And I'm just, I'm not. I'm definitely on that. I'm definitely on the sort of comedy side of things rather than the kind of activism side.
Yeah. I feel like I tread that wire maybe a little bit more closely. Like, I do rant, and it's coming from me. I'm not. Well, most of the time I'm not doing a character. Sometimes I delve into that world. But yeah, you're right. Maybe that does sort of attract the counterpoint then more easily.
I think also something I decided quite early on. I think it's probably been slightly to the detriment of clicks. Is I'm never trying to make something look actually real.
Right.
Like, I'm never trying to make that. My videos are sketches. They're comedy sketches, and I brand them, and it's also me talking to myself normally if I'm doing an interview sketch. So it's obviously not a real thing. It's not, and even the ones when I'm, presenting something, like, it's clearly a joke. So I'm not doing the thing that someone like a Rosie Holt or someone does, where they edit themselves into stuff, which is brilliant, and it works really, really well. But I think she gets a lot more of that kind of, abuse, because people aren't sure if she's real or not, and they're sort of, and then people are kind of attacking her partly because they're attacking the character, and then other people are attacking her, and so whereas I'm always like, no, this isn't true, this isn't real, I'm making a joke about what's real, but I'm not actually trying to,
But be honest, like, are there still people out there who are so oxygen starved and moronic that they, even though it's a video quite obviously of you talking to yourself, they still think that it's real and then reply back?
I definitely have had a bit of that, but very, but much, much less, I think, than people who really, who make an effort to, because, I sort of just thought, well, I saw people like Rosie doing it and thought, okay, that's what they're doing. I'll do my own thing.
Yeah.
And I've sort of stuck to that.
Because in some ways she is the sort of counterpoint to what you do. Like you've both exploded in the last 3 years since the pandemic. I guess that she probably went a similar trajectory, like going through the live comedy circuit, but then when everything was locked down, she started exploring self-made content, satirical, lampooning the government, and even though she's in character, and even though I think it's quite obvious that it's a joke, she does get an awful lot of abuse, which you would think, like, she's not being preachy or like activisty. It is comedy. So the only discernible difference between the two of you, other than the fact that she's editing herself into new stuff, is the gender aspect, which then lends itself to like, well, is this actually just as simple as internet misogyny? She gets a load of shit because she's a woman. I'm
sure. I mean, I'm always, very aware that women creators get a lot more abuse. That's just the case. Sadly, that's just, I there are certain stand-ups I've spoken to who I've talked to about doing video stuff, and they just said, I just get so much shit on YouTube or TikTok or whatever. I just get loads of people criticizing what I look like or what I sound like, and I get that very occasionally, but I can brush that off because it's every so often. But if it happens every single time you get, someone commenting on your body or whatever, then it's just horrible. And, there's no way around it. That is definitely the case. There is definitely a lot of misogyny online. And I think also what Rosie's doing is something very clever, because she's much more sort of mimicking the style of those people, those sort of the way they speak in that sort of slightly broken way, and they never quite know what they're saying. And so she's sort of, whereas my stuff tends to be a bit more kind of like I script it quite tightly and I trying to hit the gags, because that's what I'm kind of here for. So it's just it's a different approach, but yeah, no, I'm sure that a big part of it is the gender thing, sadly. Yeah. I mean, I guess the reason that this is at the forefront of my mind is I had quite an interesting exchange with some female content creators yesterday, and they were saying about how they get called grifters, they get called, like, they don't advertise their buy me a coffee, support me Patreon links or anything, but some, like, people will go looking for them, find them, and then say, look at this fucking grifting whatever. They get their heads like photoshopped and then put onto animals. And like, then I barge into this conversation and I'm like, I've literally, like, I mention my Patreon at every fucking opportunity. And I've literally never been called a grifter, like, not once, but yet put a wig and a skirt on me, and I've got no doubt that within a minute or two, I'd get the same or very similar treatment. Yeah, it's horrible. And I think that is, I mean, it's one of the worst things about the internet is the fact that it has revealed or has kind of re-revealed all of the misogyny and all the sexism and the disparity of attention and everything. It's the internet is the id of humanity, isn't it? Like, it just reveals, TikTok is awash with, sexy girls dancing because that's what loads of people want to click on and look at. But then it's also awash with loads of people commenting on those people going, well, you're disgusting. Why are you doing this? So it's just like, it's both sides, isn't it? Like, people want it, but they also hate themselves for wanting it. And that's kind of partly what it, I think, comedy obviously has had for decades, for centuries, I guess, has had a kind of problem with, are women funny or whatever. And that, I feel like that question has been, emphatically answered in the positive over the last sort of 20, 30 years. It's got impossible to say that now, but still on the internet, it's still art. People still say, "Oh, I don't find women funny," or whatever. And it's just like, come on, join the 21st century. It's insane. But it's like, it's not even just random tweeters or whatever. Like, every now and then you will see a mainstream news article say something like, "But are women funny? ... Really?" Like, question mark. It's like, oh my God, how many fucking times have we got? Like, can you just visit a comedy club? Please? Or just watch, watch any TV. There's so much good stuff out there that I know it's very frustrating. But I think, and it's still not, it's not fixed in the live world. There are still way more
I was
male
going to ask
comics
about
than
that.
female comics, but it's definitely getting better, and there are definitely more. There are loads of brilliant female comics out there now, and if you go to a comedy club, you're more likely to see a mixed bill gender-wise than you ever have been, I think.
Yeah, good stuff. Because I mean, so I'm significantly less active on the live circuit now, and I was never troubling the bookings of like Comedy Store or anywhere particularly high level. But when I was doing it, so this would be going back like 5-6 years ago now. It was still pretty bad then. There were like horror stories coming out around the open mic circuit and this was something that it never troubled me. I did not believe that this stuff actually went on, because like, why would I was this straight white guy. I ask for a spot, they say yes, that's the end of my interaction with the booking guy. Meanwhile, like underneath that whole relationship and apparatus, there's just this fucking hellscape for female comedians. Like, can I get on? No, I've already got like 2 female comedians onto that. Oh, right, okay. Well, can I get on next week? Well, I don't know, maybe if you meet me for a drink. Like, it's kind of sleazy, it's unfair. Yeah. I hope it's got better, but there's a gut feeling, a real sense in me that it's actually probably still exactly that bad.
I think I'm sure, I mean, as I say, I can't speak from direct experience either. I think there is more awareness of it. I think since the Me Too stuff and everything, there has been a bit of a sense of we've got to deal with this. And there have been some campaigns, and there are a couple of there's a thing called Time's Up, and I can't remember the name of it now. It's called Get Off. I think Get Off Comedy, which has been set up as an organisation to sort of help this situation and to. I think it's always a problem in any world where there are no kind of rules, where there's no HR department, there's no, we're all self-employed. And even before that, as you say, on the open mic circuit, they're not even self-employed, they're not even working, there's no money involved really. It's just people doing it for fun or to learn how to do it. And so I think that in many ways is the bigger problem, is the fact that there's this big, and I don't know how you deal with it, because there's this big sort of time commitment that you need to be a comedian, which is schlep round the country, going to loads of rubbish gigs, slowly building up your confidence and your material to the point where people might want to pay you. And at that point, you then are becoming a professional. But that takes, years for some people.
Yeah.
And how do you support yourself in that time? And it's obviously quite discriminatory against people who don't have much money, against people from, working class backgrounds, against women who have, caring responsibilities more often than men do. And also there's a lot of late nights, and you have to come back on night buses, and you have to travel, halfway across the country with someone you don't really know in their car and all that. There are all these kind of things about live comedy that make it just structurally quite difficult to start and do it as a new person. And that is then added to, as you say, as a new woman. So, but also times are tight and money is tight. And so the idea is saying to all promoters, you have to pay all the open spots, expenses, I think would be a great idea. I think that's a really good idea. Yeah. But I can see lots of promoters saying, well, then, that's half my profit margin. How do I run a show with if I've got 20 quid, 30 quid going out the door when I'm only making a profit of 100 quid, so this is the problem,
like that any of these open spot nights are even making a profit. Like, I mean, my experience of it is that they go to a pub that's got a function room, a basement or a loft or something, and they say, I'd like to put on a comedy night. And then the landlord says, well, how much money are you going to bring in, or do you want to rent the room off me? And then the promoter's so desperate to put on a night, they'll go like, well, I can't really rent it off you, but like I'll bring in trade. Yeah. And then they go, okay, all right. And then they get to put on their night for free. Yeah. So then the idea that they would be asked to pay expenses to open micers on top of that, they would just go, well, this isn't fucking, I can't go in debt. Like, I'm not going to pay to put it on. So, and there's a lot of, as with basically anything in the arts, how do you get people at the bottom to be paid for by people at the top? There has to be some sort of, and I think that's where there has to be some sort of redistribution or something. And that's
that's not very popular these days in general and in government circles in particular. I mean, that's why I think the solution to all of this is probably state funding of stuff, in the sense of have some sort, because if you talk to people like Richard Herring or someone who started out doing comedy in the late 80s, early 90s, that part of the reason people like that were able to do that was ironically because of Thatcher's Britain had all these sort of enterprise grants, and you could go on the dole basically. If you went on the dole, they didn't really care what you were doing. You just got some money for living expenses and rent and stuff, and then you just had to do. It's not like job seekers now, where it's very, you've got to be very clear that you're looking for a job all the time and all that kind of stuff, and there's much less money available. And they also had all these like enterprise grants where they would give you a few £100 to sort of set up a business, and if you could sort of just say, I'm a comedian, they'd just give you some money to kind of get on with it. And what you need is stuff like that for people at the early stages of their careers, little grants here, little grants there, not ones that take ages to apply for and can only be ever applied for by Arts Council friendly people, but just anybody says, I want to try this for a bit, I need a few £100 to get me going, and then that creates that seeds loads more people into the world of being able to do it. You're going to get much more diversity of class and gender and whatever, and I think that's how you do it. But there's no incentive at the moment for anyone to do that, so it's difficult.
And it's interesting. So we're talking about comedy industrially, but the same is true also of music, right? So I heard an interview with, I think it was Damon Albarn back in the day, and he was saying like, if Blur was formed now, there's absolutely no fucking way that they would have got to where they got to because of the same schemes. Like, they were able to sign on, they were able to have that safety net of the dole without this neck breathing pressure behind them to go and find a job, to go and attend 2 or 3 interviews a week or whatever.
Plus, obviously, London is massively more expensive than it used to be. Plus, all these places it's quite hard to find somewhere cheap to rent. And, all the cost of living stuff applies, obviously even more so. And that's why you end up with, it's harder and harder for people to get into it. And the people who do get into it tend to be people who have some sort of independent income or some sort of bank of mum and dad situation. Yeah. And, there's nothing wrong with those people doing it, but we need everyone doing it, lots of people doing stuff, whether it's music or art or film or comedy or whatever. You want people from all, a greater range, because then you're going to get more talent and you're going to get more competition, and that's how stuff gets better.
Well, I know everyone bangs on about diversity a lot, but it's great from a comedy audience's perspective to be able to walk into a club on a Thursday or Friday night and to just not know what you're going to get. Like, there's only so many white, well-spoken guys from a decent educational background and, their observations and nihilism and all that you can, like that's great. There's a place for that. I'm a big fan of that. But it's, as a comedy lover, I would much rather be in a club watching a night where there's 5 acts and they've all got different life experiences, different stories, different ways of talking. So it becomes a sort of self-perpetuating, like, good thing, if that makes sense.
Definitely. And I think that's where, I always think that's where the sort of arguments about diversity being sort of forced, or, you get a lot of people on the right saying, oh, this is, forced diversity or is unnecessary or whatever. I just think, but no, it's there are ways in which that can happen, but generally, you just want to hear different voices. And if you hear people from all over, I think the problem becomes when it becomes quite box ticking, where you're just looking at certain characteristics. That can lead to sort of odd situations. But as long as you're using diversity in its widest possible sense of of everything: age, gender, ethnicity, background, class, education, life experience, style as well. Sometimes you have a bill which is very gender and ethnicity diverse, but they're all sort of saying the same kind of thing. So you kind of want in the same kind of way, and you think, well, no, it'd be more interesting to have a more diverse style as well. And in the end, I do have a certain sympathy for promoters, because I occasionally book gigs myself, and it it's quite hard to find, a very good mixed diversity for every bill, because you're always competing with other gigs who want to book people and stuff. So that, I don't think people who aren't able to do it every time are in some way, being terrible people. I just get that it can also be a challenge. But it's a challenge I think it's worth taking, because you might think, I think sometimes people think, oh, my audience won't like that, or my audience are a bit conservative, or they're a bit, and you think, yeah, but they still might want to see something a bit different, and they might want to, they might not know that that's what they want, but if you give it to them, they might be quite excited by it. And I love watching an audience at some little pub in, I don't know, the depths of Kent or somewhere, and you see a sort of young black comic go on stage, and you can see them go, oh, what's good, and then they love it and they have a great time, and that's because they're funny, and that's all that matters,
Yeah, it's well, I think the assumption that people from this town might not like that comic, I think, gets flipped on its head when you remember that most sane, self-aware people actually quite like laughing at themselves. So if you have someone that is almost the opposite of them politically, walking in the room, not even politically, but just from a different walk of life, mocking and sort of, prodding the bear, playfully, and holding a mirror up, which is, that's what stand-up is, right? Holding a mirror up to yourself, but also to the audience, and saying, look, this is what you guys do, right? And, reminding them of some of the nuances of life. I don't know. I think there's real comedic mileage in that, right?
Oh, totally. And I think it's a real shame that we've got into this kind of culture war world where
pick a side.
Yeah, you've got to pick a side. It's quite tribal. And if you're taking the piss out of someone, it's not that you're just taking the piss out of them, you're attacking them, and that you're saying you're better than they are, and obviously Brexit was maybe the first big moment of that, where if you mentioned it in a room, it could sometimes, particularly outside of the big cities, it could sometimes get a very frosty reaction, even just sort of saying the word, because there was a sort of a sense of people thinking, oh, I don't want to be, I don't want to be told off, or I don't want someone to come along and mock my beliefs or what I think is right, or whatever. Or I voted for a thing, and I'm allowed to vote for stuff. That's my right. And and I don't want this kid from London to come up and tell me that I'm somehow, an idiot, and all of which is totally understandable. But yeah, it was interesting doing jokes about Brexit, or in the recent aftermath of it, because it was suddenly like, oh God, you do have to be a bit aware of what, that the room is going to be split wherever you are, even if you're in a very sort of inverted commas Remain area or Leave area, there is going to be a mix of people who some who voted for it very strongly, others who didn't really care that much, and some who just want to forget about it. And it, it felt very like a very live issue, and that was quite interesting. And I found that was before I was doing satirical stuff online, but I was doing I had a few Brexit jokes, and I enjoyed doing them, because my favorite time to do them was in a room which I was quite aware was quite Leavey,
right.
Was quite kind of, if I was in a, to use another, a cliche, if I was in the sort of middle of Essex or Surrey or somewhere, I was like, yeah, this is going to be quite a Leavey area.
Yeah.
And it was quite a challenge then to be like, how do I do these jokes about Brexit, which is sort of about how I don't think Brexit's a good idea, but I'm not just coming out and saying I think Brexit's terrible. I'm sort of coming at it from angles. Can I make them laugh at jokes about that, even though that they're sort of laughing at themselves? And it was it was fun. And I think I mostly managed to do it. There were some times where I thought, okay, they just don't like me because of this. But a lot of the time I was, because I wasn't coming, because I think there is a danger with political comedy that you come out and go, everyone who voted Brexit is a prick. And I saw a surprising number of people basically do that, basically come out and say that. And I think I did that like the very first gig after the vote.
Yeah.
In 2016, like I had a gig in London, and I came and I just sort of I was like, oh God, what's happening? Why are these people doing? But very quickly after that, and that, that worked because that was in London and people were mostly on my side. But very quickly after that, I said, well, you can't just tell people they're wrong. What kind of comedy is that? Like, that's not, that's, unless you're playing simply to people who agree with you. And then, is that comedy or is that just ranting? And there is a place for ranting, and the place for ranting is on the internet, where people can have their say back, and you can find your audience. But in a live situation where people are expecting you to be funny, if you just come on and call them all idiots, that's probably not going to work.
Yeah, I read that sort of preachy breed of comedy described as like not comedy but clapmedy, because people will like applaud it and they're like, yeah, I agree with you, but ultimately it's like this jokeless preach fest. It's like, well, I'm not sure that's stand-up anymore. That's just
Yeah, and I've heard it described as clapter. People are looking for clapter rather than laughter, but also that's. But also there is a place for that too. That there are plenty of successful comics over the years who've basically done that. It's just that now we're in this world where it's suddenly all a bit more, we're all more aware of it because of social media, because everyone's able to share stuff. And I was listening to something the other day, another podcast, and I can't remember which one it was, but someone said something which I thought was really interesting. There's this idea at the moment, and it's been a current idea for a long time, because I actually did an Edinburgh show in 2011 with this as a sort of basic idea, which is that we're all living in bubbles, that we all live in sort of echo chambers and bubbles. And this person said, and so we only hear people we actually agree with and all that stuff. But yeah, I think I would agree with the person who said it's actually the opposite. We now live in a world where we're so bombarded all the time with opinions and people that we dislike and we don't want to hear from. But social media is constantly putting those into our feeds, whether we like it or not. And so but crucially, they're also the people who are the most extreme. We're hearing from the most extreme versions of the right wing and the most extreme versions of the left wing. And so people feel kind of completely barraged by that stuff. And so and I think arguably humans, we're just not really built for that. We're built to be around people we kind of get on with, and we have a reasonably nice relationship with everybody. We're not built to be constantly barraged by totally insane opinions that we think are completely mad, which make us angry and make us upset, or make us incredibly like, yes, I need to do something, like all the time. It's like we're always in that sort of heightened adrenalized state of something's going to happen. And I guess that's why when I do comedy, I try to have fun with it, as well as it being making a point, because I think that then slightly lowers the temperature a bit. People are laughing, they're not angry. It's quite hard to laugh and be angry at the same time, I think. And maybe that's I don't know. It's
a really important point to tap into there, is that like the way that the algorithms work is they feed you things that are designed to stimulate you and to keep you tapping and replying and commenting and quote tweeting and all the rest of it. But yeah, those comments, those tweets come from, as you say, like the very far right and the very far left. So everyone consequently on the right thinks that everyone on the left is a sort of, I don't know, black, lesbian, trans something, like the extreme box tick, and the inverse is also true. Everyone on the left, certainly a lot of people on Twitter think that everyone on the right is just a hardcore racist Brexiter. And actually what you find when you step away from Twitter and you talk to your friends that may have voted Conservative at some point in the past, is that everyone kind of sits broadly in the middle, but they're just willing to step outside of that to vote for their team. I just want Team Blue to remain in. And you're like, I would feel more comfortable if Team Red stayed in. But yeah, you're right. It's sort of, for the most part, people have, what's the quote? People have more in common than divides them, right?
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think that we live in weird times for that we're now in this world where, you can totally spend your whole life, particularly in America. I mean, obviously America's gone off the deep end on this, but you can live in a world where you have totally, wraparound propaganda the whole time, where nobody, Fox News, you can watch it all day, all night, and no one's ever going to say anything that you disagree with. And this thing of, there's no challenge, there's no idea that, well, maybe some people on the right have a point and some people on the left have a point, and maybe we could kind of come, there used to be conservative Democrats and liberal Republicans in the same way there used to be Conservative Labour people and Liberal Tories, and those again are being sort of pushed out of each party. Again, happening, I think, much more in America than this country. I think it's slightly different here, but because of the primary system, that we have a system in America where if you're a Republican, you'll never win unless you go quite right wing, and Democrats will never win unless they go quite left wing, and it just gets more and more extreme. And then when the general election comes along, suddenly you've got two very extreme choices, and that's actually, as you say, not what most people in the country want. Most people in the country want someone somewhere in the middle, but you're never going to get that when you've got that kind of extreme system. I just can't see how that's going to change without some sort of big structural change. And
even if the individuals themselves are not that extreme, even if the initiatives and programs that they want to implement in the American political system, it feels like either they have to subscribe to a lot of that nonsense to get through the primary system, as you've said, or even if they don't have to do that, they get painted as though they are that extreme version by their opposite number. It's interesting though. So now that we're talking about the American system, obviously Trump has been indicted, and there's a lot of talk about what that's going to do to his presidential aspirations. I thought it would just put it to bed, because even though, like, if he's not, behind bars, I don't personally think he'll be jailed as a result of this. I think it's more likely he'll be, fined and a slap on the wrist. It might set a precedent in terms of some of the other charges that he's facing, and life could get more complicated for him. But in terms of this actual case, I think it would put his presidential aspirations to bed, purely on the basis that it's going to be really fucking difficult for him to continue to fly back to New York to do this, to appear at this court date, like, to fight that case and to go for the presidency seems a bit of a stretch.
I mean, I think I wish I agreed with you. I think the problem is, I think it's kind of just turbocharging it at the moment. And I was reading about it today, and apparently the next court date where they have to, or the date where they have to get the motions in for the court is August, and then the next actual court date is December. So it's like, it's like months and months. The legal system moves so slowly in these situations, and his whole thing over years and years and years of business is delay, attack, delay. Try to kind of attack the integrity of the people involved, and delay, and never actually get into a courtroom, because that's where bad things can happen. And I just think we're in this weird world now where whatever happens to him, his supporters will love it, and he has no there are no guardrails with him. Maybe if there ever were, there certainly aren't anymore. And he's happy to say things that are outrageous, and unfortunately, so and his supporters are, the Marjorie Taylor Greens of this world are able to say the most ludicrous things on TV, and people just sort of go, oh, can't believe you said that. It's like, yeah, but yes, you can. You should believe it, because they've been saying it for years. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think this court case will probably help him in the primary, but I don't think, just because of that, because the Republican Party is phenomenally spineless when it comes to Trump. Like, they have had so many opportunities to just drop him, to get rid of him. January the 6th is the obvious one. They could have if they just impeached him, and that would have been it. Like, he would have been gone. Obviously he's not literally got, he would have still been around as a figure, but if they'd impeached him and said you cannot run for president again, they would have cleansed him from their party. And they'd have had they'd have had people saying, how dare you do that and stuff. But actually, I think fairly quickly it would have kind of been like, okay, well, what next? Who next? What's the next thing? Maybe DeSantis would have come into the picture or whatever, but it just feels like they just won't, because they're scared of him, and they're scared of his supporters, and they don't want to get attacked on Twitter. They don't want the supporters to turn up at their houses and boo. And I get it. I understand why they don't want that, but it's
you're
their
right,
party.
It's so sort of cowardly It's so like, is there not one Republican senator or congressman or somebody with a bit of gravitas and gusto who can actually just stand up and say, this is utterly fucking, I mean, I know, look, there's been some, Mitt Romney, Liz Cheney, and they have paid the political price for doing that. But it just seems like they are absolutely the exception to the rule. And the rest of them are very, very happy to just carry on riding on that Trump train, even when it seems like that Trump train is, the stat I heard this morning is he's commanding like 30% support from the wider Republican Party, which is reasonable, but I don't think it's like he needs more than that to become president. So the idea that
I don't think he can win. Yeah, I don't. Well, famous last words, but I just don't think he can win the general election in a situation where he's under indictment and, you know, is going as crazy as he is. Like, he can definitely win the primary, but I just don't think a general election is likely to because he didn't win 2020, despite what he says, and he didn't win in 2022. You know, all of the Trump candidates did quite badly. You know, the MAGA candidates generally did quite badly in America in the midterms, and it shows, I think, that the general voter just isn't on his side. You know, the Republicans have the same problem that we've been talking about, of they're in their echo chamber, they're in Fox News, they think that Fox News is the world, is the country, and they see all these people turning up at his rallies and going, you know, you're amazing, and they think, oh wow, he's got this incredible, but he's not. You know, he doesn't have the amount of support that he used to, and he certainly doesn't have the support from the sort of the general independent voter, I think. You know, I don't want to make any predictions, but it feels to me like this is just going to go on and on and on, and then if he does end up winning the primary, you know, barring some crazy things happening, and you can never discount that happening, I just don't see him being able to win. But you know, who knows? Yeah,
I don't know. I feel like there's, and I've got to be really careful how I articulate this here. So you're right that they have this sort of echo chamber thing where the Republican senators, the decision makers, his supporters, they live in this sort of bubble where it's all about Trump, and he himself is sort of consumed by that flag waving, that support, people traveling from different states to come and shout his name at him. There was a footage I saw this morning on Twitter of him sort of waving at all his supporters out the limousine as he goes to board. Like, that's the world that he lives in. And yet the wider country, as we're saying now, seems to be sort of losing interest in him. His approval ratings are down. The likelihood of him winning the next election, and again, I don't necessarily want to make predictions, but it looks like he probably won't win it. But yet, it's like sort of, I don't know, there's a parallel there between like some comedians that I've met along the way where their aspiration is not to be the next Michael McIntyre or whoever. They just want to formulate a steady following of people who really fucking love them. So they're never like, they're not going for the mainstream ticket. They don't need to win over all however many states. They just want to be truly fucking adored by the people who rock up at Mar-a-Lago. Like, I'm mixing my metaphors here, like political candidates and comedians, but you get the point. Like, I wonder if he's actually, in some senses, he's kind of won what he actually wanted to win, which is to get this adulation.
Oh, totally. I mean, he's won, you know, he's the most famous man in the world, and he, you know, he's got this kind of, he definitely, that's what he's always been in it for, but also money, you know, that people are sending him money to pay for his legal fees. It's just insane. You know,
it is. Like, why would you send a billionaire? I'm a billionaire, guys, so I don't need to take money from any, but please donate. Like,
it's extraordinary. And I think it is, you know, he is, it's not an original observation, but he's so clearly an absolute, complete, malignant narcissist. You know, there's nothing exists apart from him, and no one exists apart from him, and no one matters apart from him. And that's why, you know, it is all about him. It's always been about him and about his adulation, and he desperately wants New York to love him. He desperately wants the mainstream press to love him, because they don't. He, you know, they become like spurned lovers who, you know, he's angry with and hates and lashes out at. You know, he's that classic sort of you know, very male thing of like, if you don't love me, I will kill you, basically. And it's that's kind of what's happened with him. I think he's definitely achieved what he wanted to do, but also he's a loser. He's now a 2-time loser, and that is the worst possible thing in his life. The idea of being a loser is the worst insult he can throw at anyone. So you can see why he's going to keep going, and he's never going to back down. And the problem is that the Republican Party, they have a choice to make, and they could, if they all swung behind another candidate, they could beat him in the primaries, because I think generally the Republican Party is not MAGA. There are loads of MAGA people in it, and they are definitely running the show at the moment, but they aren't all that. And there's plenty of Republicans who'd be quite happy to get a less sort of mad candidate. But the way the primary system works is that, the Republican Party, I believe it's winner takes all. So every state that they vote, if you get 20% and everyone else gets 19, 18, 20, you get all the votes. And so all he has to do is get his chunk of the party, his 20, 30% to vote for him every time, and he'll just win, because there's no one else who's going to come up against him. But if they all, because there's too many candidates, but if they all swung behind one candidate and said he is the anti-Trump candidate, but they're not going to, because they need the Trump voters to vote as well. So it's this sort of, they're in this kind of trap now of their own making, where they didn't beat him when he was beatable, and now he's not.
Yeah. Well, now he's become this sort of almost religious type figure. Like, I saw a interview with a lady the other day, and she literally referred to herself as a QAnon prophet, and I was like, are we actually that's where we're at now with this? I joked about it being sort of religious and the Trump doctrine and all of that stuff, but now they're literally going on the news describing him like as though he's Jesus. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene was drawing parallels between Trump and Jesus, and Trump and Nelson Mandela. Yes, like he's some sort of persecuted
they were all
Messiah.
arrested, weren't they? All these great figures who were arrested in history. So, there were also other people who were arrested, like criminals.
Yeah, I've been arrested, Matt. I'm not sure it makes me a Messiah.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see where it ends, because at the moment, so he's just been indicted. He's gone back to Mar-a-Lago. He's done this speech to his sort of, party faithful, or to the Trump faithful. No doubt he'll be applauded and celebrated, and every legal entanglement that he gets into will be seen as like, it doesn't matter like if there's black or white evidence in front of these people, in front of his supporters, saying this is what he did, here's the proof, it was falsified, he did it for this reason, and we know that because of X, Y, and Z. They will literally just look at it point blank and go, I don't believe you because he told me not to believe you. Like, because we live in a world of alternative facts. You have your facts, I have mine. And that's and I that is my biggest fear for the future. Is I just don't see how that gets resolved, because we all like to read stuff we agree with and watch stuff we agree with, and it takes a little bit of effort to not do that. And if you're in a world which is constantly feeding you stuff that you agree with, why would you ever not? Why would you ever? And I try to. I read newspapers I don't agree with, and I read and I watch stuff, but I can feel it. There's a part of me going, oh, I don't really like this. I'd rather just read something from someone that I know I'll agree with. And it's a struggle. Well, here's some other stuff that hopefully people will agree with. Matt Green is on tour. Very, very soon. The tickets for his tour are not out yet, but he is doing a few work in progress shows at the Camden Fringe, Brighton Fringe, and indeed Edinburgh Fringe later this year. He will be releasing tickets for that on the Fringe sites, but also you can get updates on it via mattgreencomedy.com. Thank you so much for joining me. I was going to say tonight. I'm so used to saying tonight when I'm doing these shows. Thank you for joining me this afternoon, Matt.
It's been a pleasure.
I'll be back on Friday night, guys, for the solo show, in which I will be ranting, ridiculing, and roasting the week's news and current affairs. If you are enjoying the podcast, please do consider jumping on the Patreon. It's patreon.com/Aid Thompson. Until next time, take care of yourselves. I'm out.